Hey everyone, it's Tyler from Zephyr Epic here, and today we're bringing you a 2022-23 Upper Deck Series 2 Young Gun tier list. This is one of my favorite pieces of content to make. I do it every single time a Series 1, Series 2, or Extended Series checklist drops. I love the prospecting side of hockey, and I love the Young Gun side of hockey card collecting just because they hold their value so well, and they're generally the first card to go up in price if a player does really well. So yeah, really not much more to it. I'm super excited for it. I do it every single series, every single set, Series 1, Series 2, Extended, just to kind of figure out who's going to be overvalued, who's going to be undervalued, so who I want to hold on to if I pull them, who I want to sell right away if I pull them. And it's just a lot of fun to do, and it's fun to look back on them in a few years just to see if you were right or you were wrong. So let's get right into the video, and actually just before we do that, if you're interested in picking up any Upper Deck hockey card products, there will be a link to our store, zephyrepic.com, in the description below, as well as a link to pick up the 2022-23 Upper Deck Series 2 Young Guns in the description as well. So feel free to check those out, but let's get into the tier list, and let's start off with an explanation of what the tiers are. So starting off, we have the GOAT tier. That one is going to be for the generational talents. This is going to be for your Sidney Crosbys, your Connor McDavids, and your Alexander Ovechkins. Literally, there are going to be very, very few players that actually fit in this tier, just because I think it's important to kind of make them a separate distinction from the S tier type players. In the S tier, you'd have your players, like your Austin Matthews, your Cale Makars, and your Leon Draisaitl's. These are pretty much like close to generational talents, but like best of the best, perennial top 5 in scoring for their position. They're going to be super, super valuable, and they do eventually have a chance to move into that GOAT tier if they have like a really good playoff or something like that. But for the most part, at least right now, they're going to be in that S tier type of category. A tier is going to be where you find a lot of your elite forwards and defensemen. So your Mitch Marners, your Elias Petterssons, your Jack Hughes, Adam Fox, Quinn Hughes, those types of players. B tier is going to be your, good like top pairing defensemen who won't have a ton of resale value. If you're unfamiliar with hockey rookie cards, generally defensemen don't have as good of value as forwards do. But yeah, so you're looking at like examples would be Miro Heiskanen, Brock Besser, Rupe Hintz, and Zach Hyman for kind of the B tier. The C plus tier is going to be for your kind of middle six forwards who won't score a ton, but they'll just kind of have that little following. People who can't afford the big young guns will kind of always collect someone at least. And these are kind of the people that they tend to find out because they're still good hockey players. So, your Ilya Mikheyevs, your Cody Glasses, some players that have potential, but might not actually have it yet. Trevor Moore is another pretty okay example here. Your C tier is going to be your bottom 6 everyday NHL forwards. These are going to be, like your Nick Pauls, players like that. They won't have a ton of value, but if they do well in the playoffs, they could pop up a little bit. And then finally, we have the D tier players. These are kind of your fringe NHLers or not a ton of potential. It is worth noting that especially for goalies, there is potential for this list to drastically change depending on how the players do at crucial times. And again, most notably for goalies, there's been a couple cases of D tier players popping into even the B or A or even like low end S tier range. A couple examples include Jordan Binnington and Akira Schmidt. Jordan Binnington, during the Blues Cup run, like right before it, you could find his young gun in every single dollar bin at every single card show that you went to. During the cup run, well, that young gun all of a sudden went up a lot in value and it ended in a high-end A tier or a low-end S tier. It is pretty wild to watch. Akira Schmidt is currently the goalie for the Devils in the playoffs right now, has been doing really well, and his young gun, again, from extended last year, went from like almost nothing in value to now like $20-30. So just something to keep in mind when we're doing the tier list. So here we go. Let's get into this year's 2022-23 Upper Deck Series 2 tier list. All right, here's my current tier list for 2022-23 Upper Deck Series 2 Young Guns. We'll start off in the D tier and work our way up. There will be timestamps if you want to skip ahead. But yeah, we'll spend less time on the lower end players, more time on the higher end players, just because there's more to talk about there. So in D tier, there are kind of 2 tiers to it. There's players that have potential and players that don't. In the players that have potential, we have Michael Carcone, Casey Fitzgerald, Ronnie Attard, Philip Kral, Lucas Johansson, Riley Walsh, Cole Koepke, and Brandon Biro. All of these players at some point have had either some limited NHL success or a ton of AHL success. They just haven't been able to sustain it, and they don't look like long-term options in the NHL. But in the case of a few of these players, especially Carcone and Brandon Biro, their AHL production could lead to them getting a bump up into other tiers. It's just they're kind of older and it's unlikely to see that happen. In terms of the other half of D tier, these are more of the like true fringe players that I don't really expect to see in the NHL a ton. There's players that I like in this tier, honestly, but they've either moved on to other leagues or they're just probably never going to get an opportunity again. These include Jaden Halbigel-Wax, Cole Reinhardt, Brandon Baddock, Ole Lixell, Hunter Drew, Grant Hudden, Dmitry Samarukov, John Lazat, Adam Huska, Ethan Prow, and Linus Hogberg. Some like interesting notes here is that Prow actually made his NHL debut at 29, but again, never probably going to have top end potential, probably always going to be, depth options. So yeah, those are all the D tier players. On to C tier, and we're starting off with my favorite C tier player is the C Troll in Buoy. I think Buoy's actually going to be a fairly like consistent selling young gun from this set. Not going to be super high valued, not going to skyrocket in price, not going to drop in price a ton, just going to be steady. You won't be too upset getting Buoy. It's just, it won't be a top end player with a ton of potential. So Neil Zamon, Nick Perbix, Pavel Regenda, Ben Jones, Jacob Lauko, Philip Ruse, Philip Hollander, Declan Chisholm, Kevin Mendelis, and Jesper Froden round out the C tier. Out of this tier, I think the few players to keep your eyes on would be Neil Zamon, Nick Perbix, and Jesper Froden in particular. I had Philip Hollander in here and actually went on a big kind of tangent about how Philip Hollander could be a good sleeper, but Philip Hollander just signed a 5-year deal in the SHL, so I had to remake this portion of the video. But yeah, Neil Zamon, very good depth option in Vancouver. Don't see a ton of upside there. Could work his way into the top 9 role. There is some scoring when he went to the AHL, so if he does find that, who knows? But again, probably just going to be a solid C tier player. Nick Perbix having a terrific season for the Lightning due to all their injuries on defense. Was very, very good in their win last night over the Leafs to kind of stave off elimination. And then finally, Jesper Froden, older at 28 years old, but has such good numbers in the AHL this year that it was like, you cannot ignore the production. There is a chance that if he hits the NHL, he's going to stick and probably going to score a little bit. So yeah, just the explanations behind the C tier. No one major there, but again, just a couple people to keep your eye on. On to the C+ tier, and this one is, there's some spicier ones in here, but we're starting off with Elmer Soderblom. I think Elmer Soderblom could be a low-end B tier player just based off of the player profile. He's 6'8", has incredibly good hands, and likely will be a fixture as a middle 6 forward, probably like a third line center, maybe second line, but with a lot of power play one time. And power play one time means that he's going to probably get points. He's probably going to be the net front presence just given his body size and his hands. So look for that, especially on a skill team, to lead to an increase of production. If he does hit at the NHL level, there is a chance he moves up into the B tier. Arber Xhekaj is probably one of the more spicier picks here. I think some people would have had him in B tier. I personally have him in C tier just because I don't think that offensive production will follow as much as the just incredibly solid hits are. And again, the underlying numbers were not great for him in Montreal, but neither were a lot of the Montreal Canadiens players because, let's be honest, they kind of sucked this year. So next up is Samuel Poulin, a player who in their draft year, absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, had to step away from hockey. They took a bit of a leave of absence this year, and they're back now playing. But so hopefully they can find their game together. They did struggle for a couple years after their draft year as well. So kind of a tough player to judge. There is potential for them to be in that B tier, but I think C+ is just kind of the right tier. There's potential. There's also potential to drop down a little bit. So I think pretty fair there. Next up is Michael Easimont. I quite like his game. Tampa Bay quite likes his game as well. He had an extremely good game last night against the Leafs with his goal. Really dominant possession player at every level he's played at. I don't think he's going to score a ton, but there is a chance he just works his way into the lineup because for whatever reason, whenever he's on the ice, his team generally controls a larger share of the shots and the goals. So that is really, really good. Probably why Tampa picked him up and probably bodes well for his value. Again, older at 26, so kind of what you see is what you're going to get. Maybe this is one of the best years of his career. We don't know, but I'm leaving him in that C+ tier because I think there is a chance that he kind of turns into a really, really solid third line, maybe even a low-end second line forward. Next up are two defensemen in Nikita Okhotiuk and Caden Gooley. Both of these defensemen have kind of the same thing for me. They both have the potential to be a second pairing defenseman, especially Kaiden Guhle. I quite like Kaiden Guhle's game. But in the case of Okhotiuk and Guhle, and I guess too, their production probably won't be good enough to bump them into the B tier. Again, defensemen generally don't sell super well. I mean, like Adam Fox and Quinn Hughes would be low-end A-tier players, like kind of mid-low-end A-tier players, and they're two of the best defensemen in the league. So pretty tough to put them higher, and I think kind of C+ tier is pretty fair for them as well. I do actually like Kaiden Guhle more than Jakai, personally speaking. Kaiden Guhle just kind of plays how I would play ESHL in the NHL video game franchise because I like to go and hit people. So lots of big hard hits between those two though. All right, moving on to B tier, and B tier is a little bit interesting. We have Dylan Holloway, who I think is the player that will vary the most depending on where he ends up in that Oilers lineup. I quite like his game. He'll probably end up being a middle six forward, but if he ends up with Connor McDavid, there is a chance for him to go into S tier. He is a very talented player. He can probably play with McDavid. It just comes down to whether or not he does. So definitely a player to keep your eye on. I think a solid like low end B tier right now, but I have him in the high end of B tier just because that potential is so significant that you just probably want to hold on to his young gun if you have it, because again, if he ever clicks with McDavid, his points are going to skyrocket and his value is going to skyrocket because points are the main thing that drives up a young gun's value. Speaking of points, we have Andrei Kuzmenko, arguably the best player this year from this entire checklist. Really solid first year. And honestly, I think second or third highest selling young gun from the crop. But the reason I have him in B tier is I follow the Canucks really closely. My main worry is that I don't know if he's going to be playing with Pettersson next year. And that's probably a big factor behind his production. He also shot at like an extremely high percentage, but I'm not too worried about that if he's playing with Pettersson. It's just really, it comes down to whether or not he plays with an elite center because he's a very good complementary player. I don't think he's the best play driver. So kind of one of those, he's either going to be in the A tier, putting up a lot of points, or he'll probably drop into the low end B or even C tier because if he's not playing with elite offensive players, his production is going to stall out a little bit. So a little bit of a spicy take there, but I think he is a pretty firm B tier player. Next up, we have David Jiricek for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Again, he's a defenseman, and actually the next three players are all defensemen. So right now his value's kind of in that C+ tier, but I think long-term looking at it, he'll be a B tier player. Really good AHL numbers, really good draft year numbers. Quite like his game. Probably will be the best defenseman in Columbus as soon as like 2 years from now, if not even next year. So lots to like there. Very talented player. It's just whether or not he'll get the hobby love to bump up into actual like high end B, or if he'll be like low end B, high end C+ to be determined. Speaking of a player of a similar stature is Jake Sanderson. He'll kind of be overshadowed a little bit by Shabbat and Chychrun now, but very complimentary piece on an up-and-coming Ottawa Senators team. Again, same things can be said. Very good offensive defenseman. Actually had like fairly good counting stats this year. Underlying metrics weren't as good, and those are generally a good predictor of future success, like in terms of immediate future success, at least for a rookie. But again, young defenseman, first year in the league, pretty good season for him. Nothing really like that goes like, oh, he's not going to be that good at the NHL level. So I think solid low end B tier player, has the slight chance to get into A tier, but I think B tier is pretty firm for him. And then finally, we have Brant Clark, who had just an insane year for the Barrie Colts in the OHL. Be interesting to see because the season just ended if he draws into the NHL lineup for the LA Kings. Again, similar things here though compared to the other defensemen with Jiricek and Sanderson. Is I think he's actually a little bit below them. He'll probably end up being like a second pairing power play guy rather than a first pairing guy for me, but still going to be a very good defenseman, probably going to put up points on a good team. So that always helps out a player's value. And now it's time for A tier. And so we're going to go from the players who I think are the lowest end in A tier to the player who I think are the highest end in A tier. So we're going to start off with Dylan Guenther and Shane Wright. Both of these players right now, as it stands, I would put in like a B+ tier rather than an A tier, but I think there's enough of a gap between them and the rest of the B tier to kind of have them in the A tier. It's confusing a way of saying I think they're B tier players, but they have A tier upside. Dylan Guenther in particular, very good goal scoring, had decent NHL stats this year. His underlying numbers weren't the best, but again, he's young. He was on a really bad team. Can't put too much stock into that. Absolutely lighting it up with Seattle, but also Seattle is just absolutely one of the best WHL teams. That playoff series, if you're in the BC area or like Washington area and you can see a Seattle Thunderbirds game or a Kamloops Blazer game, if those teams meet up, like they've just been crushing the playoffs. That is going to be a matchup to keep your eye on, and probably both of those teams I'd say would be good bets to see in the Memorial Cup. So because the Blazers are hosting it. So yeah, pretty interesting player. Again, like the upside there. Probably ends up as a high-end B tier, but there is some A tier potential there. And same with Shane Wright. Shane Wright is a very interesting player because he was kind of touted as a super prospect throughout his entire career. However, if you dug into it a little bit more, you'd notice that a lot of his production came due to elevated ice time during his younger ages. He's still a really good player. Like I'm not like saying he's a bad player or anything like that. Like he's still a really good player. He's gonna be a top 6 NHL center. It's just the expectations were really, really high for them, and I think they finally kind of settled down a little bit. He's going to be probably the second center behind Matty Beniers, so he's always going to be overshadowed, but that could also play in his favor where he might draw more favorable minutes and increase his offensive production a little bit. Either way, I think he's going to be a solid two-way center for the most of his career on a very good Seattle Kraken team, so kind of the same thing as like Guenther, low-end A tier, kind of high-end B tier. With, I'd say he has a slight bit of potential to get into the S tier just because based off of his track record, at least in his like 15 and 16-year-old seasons, he projected to be, in that S tier category. And then we move on to Slafkovsky, who is picked first overall. Similar thing applies here, and I forgot to mention this for Wright as well, is that they're both extremely young. Both him and Slafkovsky are still like teenagers. Maybe, I think they're both still teenagers at least. I know Slafkovsky is, like he just turned 19 years old. That's really young to be in today's NHL, and it's going to take some transition time. I know Slafkovsky had a rough year due to his injury and just his general play, but again, Montreal was a bad team. It's going to take him some time to get used to the NHL, so hopefully next year he'll kind of take that next little step. And I think of all the players, if you were to bet on one player to be the best from this rookie crop, the betting favorite would be Slafkovsky, I would say. So very unique profile, strong kind of power-ish forward with skill. So yeah, I think he's a solid A tier option, just firmly A tier right now. And then that leads us to who I think has the potential to be the best young gun from this entire crop, and that's Wyatt Johnston. Very good CHL numbers, extremely good NHL numbers this year, and he's going to be on a good Dallas Stars team, probably playing with Jason Robertson or at least alongside him. So that production is going to be probably pretty solid given that Jason Robertson is one of the best players in the NHL. And that's why I have him in the A tier. I think he's a firm like mid-end A tier to low-end to like high-end B tier player. He'll probably file somewhere in between there. It just depends on his production given that Jason Robertson is kind of like a mid-end A tier player. So just kind of depends on your thoughts and views on players. So yeah, I think if there's one player that's going to break into the S tier, it's going to be Slafkovsky or Shane Wright. I think if there's one player that's going to like kind of surprise people, it might be Dylan Holloway in terms of good. In terms of bad, I don't know if there's going to be anyone that's like based off of this. I'm pretty conservative overall with this list. I think maybe one like Brandt Clark might shock people a little bit in the opposite direction. But again, that's just whether or not he transitions well at the NHL level. I have a little bit of concerns over that, but he's such a talented player that there's enough talent there that he can do it, and I'm not too concerned. So yeah, that is my tier list for 2022-23 Upper Deck Series 2 Young Guns. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll leave a link to the actual tier list so you can do it yourself if you want to do that. Yeah, and again, if you're interested in picking up a box of Series 2, link in the description below. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more of this style of content, let me know as well. Take care and have a good day. See ya.